Hello, children. This is Grandma Carla, and I have been away for a while. I did some traveling and I did a whole bunch of little projects, but now I'm back to finish Ramona and Her Father. Now, remember that my granddaughter Hannah has read Ramona and Her Father's chapter 1, 2, and 3 already. So I'm going to start with chapter 4 and continue the good reading that Miss Hannah was doing. But before I do that, I want to let you in on something very, very special that happened to me today. I got a letter. I got a little note, and the person who wrote this note loves Frozen. I like that movie too. But this little girl likes Frozen, and this sweet little girl's name is Ray, and she loves to read, and she's in the 2nd grade, and she loves to listen to Ramona forever. And I just wanted to dedicate this reading to little Ray, who wrote me a sweet, sweet note and sent it to my mailbox. Now, the reason that I'm so excited is this was my very first letter that I ever got from a child to Grandma Carla. So it really, really meant a lot, and she sent it to my mailbox, which is Grandma Carla, P.O. Box 1422, Niceville, Florida 32588. Didn't she do a good job addressing that envelope? So, as I was just feeling so good in my heart because little Ray wrote me a sweet note, I got to thinking, I wanted to write Ray a note, and I did. Dear Ray, and it's about to go in the mail. So Ray, you're going to get a note from Grandma Carla very soon. But the other thing I thought about was, how many times do we give unkind words instead of kind words? Ray gave me some kind words, and it just blessed my heart. Sometimes we, though, all of us, including Grandma Carla, sometimes we can give unkind words. And whenever I hear unkind words from somebody, it makes me feel very sad. It makes me get my feelings hurt. Doesn't it hurt your feelings when somebody says something unkind? But you know what? After I think about it a little bit, I'm so sorry for that person. Because do you know that people that say unkind things very often hear unkind things? And people that are ugly and nasty to you, that's probably because somebody else was ugly or nasty to them. So whenever somebody treats you badly, I want you to think about it. What can you do to make their day better? People usually don't treat other people ugly when they're happy inside their heart. And we know that only Jesus can make us truly happy in our hearts. But writing somebody a little letter might be something that would make their day much better. Giving somebody a kind word might change their whole week. This week, Grandma Carla has started to go into the jails and visit with some women that are in the jails because they did something wrong. And I've been leading a little Bible study, but the Lord has just really laid it on my heart that these people that have done wrong things and have gone to jail because they've done wrong things, they need our help, because they probably did not have as a good a home as I did when I grew up, and maybe they didn't have a mommy and a daddy that loved them like my mommy and daddy loved me and like I loved my children. And so I have just determined that I'm going to try to be kinder to people. I'm going to try to go out of my way a little bit more to bless other people's day. So, as Ray has reminded us, just a little note can make somebody feel so much better. And a kind word, or maybe just a pat on the back, sometimes that's all it takes to change somebody's frown into a smile. So will you join me on that challenge? Will you join Grandma Carla's kindness challenge? I think Ray started something pretty good, don't you? She took the time to write me a note. She didn't have to do that. So why don't you take the time today to write somebody a note? Maybe a note to mommy or daddy or somebody, an older woman or man in your church that maybe doesn't have anybody close by to just love them. Or maybe somebody that is just in the supermarket and they just look lonely and you just maybe give them your place in line. There's a lot of things that we can do to treat people a little kinder today. So, that's Grandma's Kindness Challenge. I hope you'll join me in that today. So today, I'm going to read Ramona and Her Father, Chapter 4. And this chapter is dedicated to Ray from Georgia. I love you, Ray. Ramona to the rescue. The Quimbys said very little at breakfast the next morning. Beezus was moody and silent. Mrs. Quimby, in her white uniform, was in a hurry to leave for work. Picky resentfully ate a few bites of puss putty. Mr. Quimby did not say, "I told you he would eat it," when he was really hungry, but the whole family was thinking it. He might as well have said it. Ramona wished her family would cheer up. When they had finished eating, she found herself alone with her father. "Bring me an ashtray, please," said Mr. Quimby. "That's a good girl." Reluctantly, Ramona brought the ashtray, and with her face rigid with disapproval, watched her father light his after-breakfast cigarette. "Why so solemn?" he asked as he shook out the flame of the match. "Is it true what Beezus said?" Ramona demanded. "About what?" asked Mr. Quimby. Ramona had a feeling that her father really knew what she meant. "About smoking will make your lungs turn black," she answered. Mr. Quimby blew a puff of smoke toward the ceiling. "I expect to be one of those old men with a long gray beard who has his picture in the paper on his 100th birthday and who tells reporters he owes his long life to cigarettes and whiskey." Ramona was not amused. "Daddy," her voice was stern, "you are just being silly again." Her father took a deep breath and blew 3 smoke rings across the table. A most unsatisfactory answer to Ramona. On the way to school, Ramona cut across the lawn for the pleasure of leaving footprints in the dew, and then did not bother to look back to see where she had walked. Instead of running or skipping, she trudged. Nothing was much fun anymore when her family quarreled, and then was silent at breakfast, and her father's lungs were turning black from smoke. Even though Mrs. Rogers announced, "Today our 2nd grade is going to have fun learning," as she wrote the date on the blackboard, school turned out to be dreary because the class was having review again. Review meant boredom for some, like Ramona, because they had to repeat what they already knew, and worry for others, like Davy, because they had to try again what they could not do in the first place. Review was the worst part of school. Ramona passed the morning looking through her workbook for words with double O's like book and cook. She carefully drew eyebrows over the O's and dots within, making the O's look like crossed eyes. Then she drew mouths with the ends turned down under the eyes. When she finished, she had a cross-looking workbook that matched her feelings. She was putting frowny faces all through. She was in no hurry to leave the building at recess, but when she did, Davy yelled, "Look out, here comes Ramona," and began to run. So, of course, Ramona had to chase him around and around the playground until time to go inside again. Running until she was hot and panting made Ramona feel so much better that she was filled with sudden determination. Her father's lungs were not going to turn black. She would not let them. Ramona made up her mind right then and there in the middle of arithmetic that she was going to save her father's life. That afternoon after school, Ramona gathered up her crayons and papers from the kitchen table, took them into her room, and shut the door. She got down on her hands and knees and went to work on the bedroom floor, printing a sign in big letters. Unfortunately, she did not plan ahead and soon reached the edge of the paper. She could not find the Scotch tape to fasten two pieces of paper together, so she had to continue on another line. When she finished, her sign read, okay, so what's that? No smoking. No smoking. It would do. Ramona found a pen and fastened her sign to the living room curtains where her father could not miss it. Then she waited, frightened by her daring. Mr. Quimby, although he must have seen the sign, said nothing until after dinner when he had finished his pumpkin pie. He asked for an ashtray and then inquired, "Say, who is this Mr. King?" "What Mr. King?" asked Ramona, walking into his trap. "No King," answered her father without cracking a smile. Chagrined, Ramona tore down her sign, crumpled it, threw it into the fireplace, and stalked out of the room, resolving to do better next time. The next day after school, Ramona found the Scotch tape and disappeared into her room to continue work on her plan to save her father's life. While she was working, she heard the phone ring and waited, tense as the whole family now waited whenever the telephone rang. She heard her father clear his throat before he answered, "Hello?" After a pause, he said, "Just a minute, Howie. I will call her." There was disappointment in his voice. No one was calling to offer him a job, after all. "Ramona, can you come over and play?" Howie asked when Ramona went to the telephone. Ramona considered. Of course, they would have to put up with Howie's messy little sister, Willa Jean. But she and Howie would have fun building things if they could think of something to build. Yes, she would like to play with Howie, but saving her father's life was more important. "No, thank you. Not today," she said. "I have important work to do." Just before dinner, she taped to the refrigerator door a picture of a cigarette so long that she had to fasten 3 pieces of paper together to draw it. After drawing the cigarette, she had crossed it out with a big black X, and under it she had printed in big letters the word "bad." Beezus giggled when she saw it, and Mrs. Quimby smiled as if she were trying not to smile. Ramona was filled with fresh courage. She had allies. Her father had better watch out. When Mr. Quimby saw the picture, he stopped and looked while Ramona waited. He said, backing away for a better view. "An excellent likeness, The artist shows talent." And that was all he said. Ramona felt let down, although she was not sure what she had expected. Anger, perhaps? Punishment? A promise to give up smoking? The next morning, the sign was gone, and that afternoon, Ramona had to wait until Beezus came home from school to ask, "How do you spell pollution?" When Beezus printed it out on a piece of paper, Ramona went to work making a sign that said, "Stop air pollution." "Let me help," said Beezus, and the two girls, kneeling on the floor, printed a dozen signs. "Smoking stinks. Cigarettes start forest fires. Smoking is hazardous to your health." Ramona learned new words that afternoon. Fortunately, Mr. Quimby went out to examine the car, which was still making a tappity-tappity noise. This gave the girls a chance to tape the signs to the mantel, the refrigerator, the dining room curtains, the door of the hall closet, and every other conspicuous place they could think of. This time, Mr. Quimby simply ignored the signs. Ramona and Beezus might as well have saved themselves a lot of work, for all he seemed to notice. But how could he miss so many signs? He must be pretending. He had to be pretending. Obviously, the girls would have to step up their campaign. By now, they were running out of big pieces of paper, and they knew they'd better than to ask their parents to buy more, not when the family was so short of money. "We can make little signs on scraps of paper," said Ramona, and that was what they did. Together they made tiny signs that said, "No smoking, stop air pollution, smoking is bad for your health, and stamp out cigarettes." On some, Ramona drew stick figures of people stretched out flat and dead, and on one, a cat on his back with his feet in the air. These they hid wherever their father was sure to find them: in his bathrobe pocket, fastened around the handle of his toothbrush with a rubber band, inside his shoes, under his electric razor. Then they waited and waited. Mr. Quimby said nothing while he continued to smoke. Ramona held her nose whenever she saw her father with a cigarette. He appeared not to notice. The girls felt discouraged and let down. Once more, Ramona and Beezus devised a plan, the most daring plan of all, because they had to get hold of their father's cigarettes just before dinner. Fortunately, he had tinkered with the car, still trying to find the reason for the tappity-tappity-tap, and had to take a shower before dinner, which gave the girls barely enough time to carry out their plan. All through dinner, the girls exchanged excited glances, and by the time her father asked her to fetch the ashtray, Ramona could hardly sit still. She was so excited. As usual, her father pulled his cigarettes out of his shirt pocket. As usual, he tapped the package against his hand, and as usual, a cigarette, or what appeared to be a cigarette, slid out. Mr. Quimby must have sensed that what he thought was a cigarette was lighter than it should be, because he paused to look at it while Ramona held her breath. He frowned, looked more closely, unrolled the paper, and discovered that it was a tiny sign that said, "Smoking is bad." Without a word, he crumpled it and pulled out another, he thought, cigarette, which turned out to be a sign saying, "Stamp out cigarettes." Mr. Quimby crumpled it and tossed it onto the table with the first sign. "Ramona," Mr. Quimby's voice was stern, "my grandmother used to say, first time is funny, second time is silly." Mr. Quimby's grandmother's wisdom was interrupted by a fit of coughing. Ramona was frightened. Maybe her father's lungs already had begun to turn black. Beezus looked triumphant. "See, we told you smoking was bad for you," she was clearly thinking. Mrs. Quimby looked both amused and concerned. Mr. Quimby looked embarrassed, pounded himself on the chest with his fist, took a sip of coffee, and said, "Something must have caught in my throat." When his family remained silent, he said, "All right, Ramona. As I was saying, enough is enough." Ramona scowled and slid down in her chair. Nothing was ever fair for second graders. Beezus helped, but Ramona was getting all the blame. She also felt defeated. Nobody ever paid attention to second graders except to scold them. No matter how hard she tried to save her father's life, he was not going to let her save it. Ramona gave up and soon found that she missed the excitement of planning the next step in her campaign against her father's smoking. Her afternoons after school seemed empty. Howie was home with tonsillitis, and she had no one to play with. She wished there were more children her age in her neighborhood. She was so lonely that she picked up the telephone. She dialed the Quimby's telephone number to see if she could answer herself. All she got was a busy signal and a reprimand from her father for playing with the telephone when someone might be trying to reach him about a job. On top of all this, the family had pumpkin pie for dinner. "Not again," protested Beezus. The family had eaten pumpkin pie and pumpkin custard since the night the cat ate part of the jack-o'-lantern. Beezus had once told Ramona that she thought her mother had tried to hide the pumpkin in the meatloaf, but she wasn't sure because everything was all ground up together. "I'm sorry, but there aren't many pumpkin recipes. I can't bear to waste good food," said Mrs. Quimby. "But I do remember seeing a recipe for pumpkin soup someplace." No, her family was unanimous. Ramona was so disappointed because her father had ignored all of her little signs that she did not feel much like eating, and especially not pumpkin pie for what seemed like the 100th time. She eyed her triangle of pie and knew she could not make it go down. She was sick of pumpkin. "Are you sure you cut off all the parts with cat spit on them?" she asked her mother. "Ramona," Mr. Quimby, who had been stirring his coffee, dropped his spoon. "Please, we are eating." They had been eating, but after Ramona's remark, nobody ate another bite of pie. Mr. Quimby continued to smoke, and Ramona continued to worry. Then one afternoon, when Ramona came home from school, she found the back door locked. When she pounded on it with her fist, no one answered. She went to the front door, rang the doorbell, and waited. Silence. Lonely silence. She tried the door even though she knew it was locked. More silence. Nothing like this had ever happened to Ramona before. Someone was always waiting when she came home from school. Ramona was frightened. Tears filled her eyes as she sat down on the cold concrete steps to think. Where could her father be? She thought of her friends at school, Davy and Sharon, who did not have fathers. Where had their fathers gone? Everybody had a father sometime. Where could they go? Ramona's insides tightened with fear. Maybe her father was angry with her. Maybe he had gone away because she had tried to make him stop smoking. She thought that she was trying to save his life, but maybe she was being mean to him. Her mother said she must not annoy her father because he was worried about being out of work. Maybe she had made him so angry that he did not love her anymore. Maybe he had gone away because he did not love her. She thought of all the scary things that she had seen on television. Houses that had fallen down in earthquakes, people shooting people, big hairy men on motorcycles, and she knew she needed her father to keep her safe. The cold from the concrete seeped through Ramona's clothes. She wrapped her arms around her knees to keep warm as she watched a dry leaf scratch along the driveway in the autumn wind. She listened to the honking of a flock of wild geese flying through the gray clouds on their way south for the winter. They came from Canada, her father had once told her, but that was before he had gone away. Raindrops began to dot the driveway, and tears dotted Ramona's skirt. She put her head down on her knees and cried. Why had she been so mean to her father? If he ever came back, he could smoke all he wanted, fill the ashtrays, and turn the air blue, and she wouldn't say a single word. She just wanted her father back, black lungs and all. And suddenly there he was, scrunching through the leaves on the driveway, with the collar of his windbreaker turned up against the wind and his old fishing hat pulled down over his eyes. "Sorry I'm late," he said as he got out his key. "Is that what all this boo-hooing is about?" Ramona wiped her sweater sleeve across her nose and stood up. She was so glad to see her father and so relieved that he had not gone away that anger blazed up. Her tears became angry tears. Fathers were not supposed to worry their little girls. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "You're supposed to be here when I come home from school. I thought you'd gone away and left me." "Take it easy. I wouldn't go off and leave you. Why would I do a thing like that?" Mr. Quimby unlocked the door and with a hand on Ramona's shoulder guided her into the living room. "I'm sorry I had to worry you. I was collecting my unemployment insurance and I had to wait in a long line." Ramona's anger faded. She knew all about long lines and understood how difficult they were. She had waited in lines for her turn in the slides at the park. She had waited in line in the school lunchroom back in the days when her family could spare lunch money once in a while. She had waited in lines with her mother at the checkout counter in the market. When she was little, she had waited a long, long time in lines to see Santa Claus in the department stores. And these were the worst, most boring lines of all. She had waited in lines with her mother at the bank. She felt bad because her father had had to wait in a line, and she also understood that collecting unemployment insurance did not make him happy. "Did somebody try to push ahead of you?" Ramona was wise in the way of lines. "No, the line was just unusually long today." Mr. Quimby went into the kitchen to make himself a cup of instant coffee. While he waited for the water to heat, he poured Ramona a glass of milk and gave her a graham cracker. "Feeling better?" he asked. Ramona looked at her father over the rim of her glass and nodded, spilling milk down her front. Silently he handed her a dish towel to wipe up while he poured hot water over the instant coffee in his mug. Then he reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a package of cigarettes, looked at it a moment, and tossed it onto the counter. Ramona had never seen her father do this before. Could it be? Mr. Quimby leaned against the counter and took a sip of coffee. "What would you like to do?" he asked Ramona. Ramona considered before she answered. "Something big and important. But what?" she wondered. "Break a record in that school book of records Beezus talked about? Climb Mount Hood?" "Such as?" her father asked. Ramona finished scrubbing the front of her sweater with a dish towel. "Well," she said, thinking, "you know that big bridge across the Columbia River?" "Yes, the interstate bridge, the one we cross when we drive to Vancouver. I've always wanted to stop on that bridge and get out of the car and stand with one foot in Oregon and one foot in Washington." "A good idea, but not practical," said Mr. Quimby. "Your mother has the car, and I doubt if cars are allowed to stop on the bridge. What else?" "It's not exactly important, but I always like to crayons," said Ramona. How long would her father leave his cigarettes on the counter? Mr. Quimby set his cup down. "I have a great idea. Let's draw the longest picture in the whole world." He opened a drawer and pulled out a roll of shelf paper. When he tried to unroll it on the kitchen floor, the paper rolled itself up again. Ramona quickly solved the problem by scotch taping the end of the roll on the floor. Together she and her father unrolled the paper across the kitchen and knelt with a box of crayons between them. "What shall we draw?" she asked. "How about the whole state of Oregon?" he suggested. "That's big enough." Ramona's imagination was excited. "I'll begin with the interstate bridge," she said. "And I'll tackle Mount Hood," said her father. Together they went to work, Ramona on the end of the shelf paper and her father halfway across the kitchen. With crayons, Ramona drew a long black bridge with a girl standing astride a line in the center. She drew blue water under the bridge, even though the Columbia River always looked gray. She added gray clouds, gray dots for raindrops, and all the while she was drawing, she was trying to find courage to tell her father something. Ramona glanced at her father's picture, and sure enough, he had drawn Mount Hood, peaked with a hump on the south side, exactly the way it looked in real life in the days when the clouds lifted. "I think you draw better than anybody in the whole world," said Ramona. Mr. Quimby smiled. "Not quite," he said. "Daddy," Ramona summoned courage, "I'm sorry I was mean to you." "You weren't mean." Mr. Quimby was adding trees at the base of the mountain. "You're right, you know." "Am I?" Ramona wanted to be sure. "Yes." This answer gave Ramona even more courage. "Is that why you didn't have a cigarette with your coffee? Are you going to stop smoking?" "I'll try," answered Mr. Quimby, his eyes on his drawing. "I'll try." Ramona was filled with joy, enthusiasm, and relief. "You can do it, Daddy. I know you can do it." Her father seemed less positive. "I hope so," he answered. "But if I succeed, Picky will still have to eat Puss Putty." "He can try too," said Ramona, and slashed dark V's across her gray sky to represent a flock of geese flying south for the winter. So, Dad is going to try to stop smoking. So here are the pictures to Chapter 4, which is entitled Ramona to the Rescue. Okay, here's the first picture of Ramona with Picky on her back and her stuffed animals, and she's making the no smoking sign. Then we have another picture of Daddy finding a little sign in his pocket of his bathrobe, or sometimes they put it on his toothbrush, but he is finding little bitty signs everywhere while Beezus and Ramona peek in. And here's Ramona feeling so sad because she thinks her daddy has gone off and left her because she was trying to get him to stop smoking, and she was afraid that he had gotten mad and stopped loving her. Daddies don't stop loving their little girls for something like that, so silly. But she really does love her daddy, and her daddy does love her. He might get mad at her sometimes, but he still loves her. Here is Ramona, and she is drawing the big state of Oregon with her daddy. They're having a great time using shelf paper to color on. And that is the end of Chapter 4. So, just as Ramona left little notes to her daddy because she wanted to save his life from smoking, I want you to think of some sweet little notes that maybe you can leave Mom and Dad, and tell them how much that you appreciate them and love them. And sometimes you can maybe put a note in Daddy's lunchbox and just tell him what a great daddy he is. And tomorrow Sunday is Father's Day. So today I'm doing this 2 days before Father's Day. So hopefully some of you will see it. And remember that this weekend is Father's Day, and you could write a special card for your daddy, and that would make him very, very happy. Just like my special little note from Ray made Grandma Carla very happy, I want you to go and make some other people very happy this week by writing special notes or maybe treating them very specially, just to let them know that you love them. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.